Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today on local housing trust funds and community engagement. My name is Casey Lauderdale. I'm a Community Development Officer with the Minnesota Housing Partnership, and this is the third webinar of a three-part series following the release of our Minnesota Local Housing Trust Fund Manual, and that was released just this last summer, so thanks for being here with us today. Just to do a little bit of recap, on our last webinar, we spoke with Carrie Goldberg, Randall Himmerlin, and Dr. Eric Johnson about the tools and considerations regarding the implementation of a local housing trust fund. We are also recording today's webinar, and it will be posted to MHP's YouTube channel. On today's webinar, we have three great guest speakers: Katie Hines from the Center for Community Change, Barb Janetta from Alliance Housing and the Make Homes Happen Coalition, and Jennifer Bergman from the Brainerd and Crow Wing County HRA. They will be sharing their insights and experience of getting the community engaged in the creation and implementation of local housing trust funds. Joining me also in the MHP office is Elizabeth Glidden, the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Policy. After our guest presentations today, we will have some time for Q&A. So if you'd like to ask a question, click on the Q&A icon, type in your question, and send it, and we'll be able to answer that and forward it here on our side. So jumping in, I just want to give us a very brief background on what local housing trust funds are in case there's anyone out there who's brand new to this idea or perhaps would like a quick reminder. But basically, housing trust funds are established by elected government bodies at the city, county, or state level. They can also be established as a multi-county or regional housing trust fund. And basically what they do is that they dedicate public revenues to a distinct fund that is used to address housing needs. So I like to think of it as a savings account for housing. Somewhat recently, the Minnesota legislature approved a statute that is sort of a guiding document for what the state considers a housing trust fund to be. And it's a really great place to start if you're considering establishing a housing trust fund, to look at the statute and go through what its definitions and language is. So I'll just turn it over to Elizabeth here to tell us about a few of the benefits of having a local housing trust fund.
Thanks, Casey, and welcome everyone. Again, my name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Policy at the Minnesota Housing Partnership. One of the main questions that we get about local housing trust funds is a little bit of the why. Why a local housing trust fund? Why is that an important tool? Why is that an important tool to prioritize for serving needs of residents and housing? So one of the signature reasons for local housing trust funds is the ability to safeguard dedicated and predictable funding for housing needs. And what Minnesota Housing Partnership in our Local Housing Trust Fund manual recommends as a best practice is that you identify ongoing funding streams or revenue streams for your local housing trust fund, as this is a way that you have predictability to those funding streams, but also that you are not revisiting political decisions every budget cycle. You're doing that when you initiate a program. There's great data from all over the country on how local housing trust funds leverage additional investment by many multiples, sometimes as high as 14 to 1. Common figures we see are 6 to 1, 7 to 1, 8 to 1. The flexibility of a local housing trust fund is also a signature hallmark that a local housing trust fund allows a community to define what are its most pressing needs, and then ensure that program design is tailored to that need. And finally, this is a great way to signal to community as well as to folks outside the community that housing is a priority. It's a priority for investment. Today, we're going to focus on how community interaction and engagement is influential to local housing trust funds, and I'm really excited about the speakers that we have, in part because this is one of the most common questions that we have from community members or from others within cities across Minnesota, HRAs, and other entities. Couple ways that I would suggest that you can think about local housing trust funds and community engagement. One is, how does momentum around housing issues grow organically from community or community organized campaigns? And we're going to hear some examples of that from our speakers. Another frame for thinking about this is, how does staff at cities or HRAs have better models for engaging with community throughout the local housing trust fund process, whether that might be participatory models of public process, or thinking about how community is part of the decision-making process or advisory committee process. We do have some additional resources that we invite you to look at, including Center for Community Change's great Housing Trust Fund Project website. And then finally, you can go ahead and change. Here's a great way to connect with me and Casey Lauderdale. I'll turn it over to Casey.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Katie Hines. She's a senior organizer with the Center for Community Change. And Katie has been an organizer with Community Change since 2009, including the last 5 years as a senior organizer for the Housing Trust Fund team. Previously at the center, she has worked on the National Health Care Campaign, Immigrants' Rights Campaign, and Jobs Campaign, as well as being instrumental in developing with the center's state partner, the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, a project called Ohio Movement Builders, which works to organize new leaders through a robust training and education program that allows for opportunities of empowerment so that people can join the movement for social change. So Katie, I will hand it over to you.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here with everyone today. Only thing I'd add to that bio that is there is Community Change just recently changed its name and dropped the Center for, so it's just Community Change. As was said, I've been on the Housing Trust Fund project for a little over 5 years now. I've been at the, I still say it, I've been at Community Change for a little over 10 years. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is 3 things. One is the engagement of the public by cities and jurisdictions, and just talk about some best practices out there for how cities themselves engage the public in making plans for housing trust funds. The second thing I want to talk about are reports that pay off. So kind of talking on 2 levels. One, kinds of reports that help to get housing trust funds and the public will to pass them, and then continue and expand housing trust funds as well. We'll look through a case study or a best practice on that. Then finally, I'll wrap up with some materials and resources at the Housing Trust Fund Project's website and talk with you all about that as well. So if we go to the next slide. So the first place I wanted to just touch base with you all on is Iowa. So Iowa has a really robust local housing trust fund throughout their local communities, both city, county, and regional. I'm not going to talk as much today about, of course, the mechanisms or anything like that, or the funding sources, but needless to say, there are 27 local housing trust funds all throughout the state of Iowa. In a similar way, they were enacted through state enabling legislation so that they could have these trust funds happen in localities and regions. Similarly, they have how those trust funds should look and how those trust funds should come about. Iowa, I think, is a little bit different in the fact that they do the state matching funds to the local housing trust funds, but that is for another day to talk about. But what I wanted to point out today is that one of the regulations within the state enabling legislation is that there must be public input into the housing trust fund, and that there must be public hearings and the engagement of the public. So that was one thing that the state enabling legislation requested and asked of each jurisdiction who wanted to start a local housing trust fund. Next slide. So I wanted to drill down on a particular county in Iowa, which is Polk County, that is doing just a really great job going up and beyond what the enabling legislation talks about for engaging the public. So you'll see on this slide that they have, this is actually from their website. This is a screenshot or a couple screenshots from their website at their Housing Trust Fund website. And they have a couple things that are really up and beyond what's asked in the state enabling legislation. And the first is the Affordable Housing Week. And the Affordable Housing Week is, as it says, a week, but where they really get out into the community and talk about the needs for affordable housing. As a matter of fact, one thing they did in 1 year was engage high school seniors and juniors around designing homes, affordable homes, and having a contest about it. And so it just really made a lot of splash about what affordable housing is and engaging the community who wouldn't normally be engaged around the issues of affordable housing and educating the broader public about the need. The other piece, the Housing Tomorrow and the community housing policy that you'll see are both kind of planning and thinking about what kind of affordable homes and housing they want to develop in Polk County. And those both are, they're both events that they hold and planning documents. They not only have transparency on their website, but that they have multiple community engagement opportunities. But the other piece I wanted to point out that I think really is exciting from Iowa is this Can I Be Your Neighbor piece. And if you go to their website, you'll see that they have lots of stories about people who live in affordable homes and those people, why they live in why they needed affordable homes, what it has meant to them, and really breaks down the stereotypes that people get about housing and affordable homes, and so that they really begin again to educate the public. So when they need to talk with the public about funding, there's a greater knowledge of what's going on in Polk County. So that's the first one, and we'll go to the next slide to talk about another best practice. And this is in Boulder, Colorado. And in Boulder, they have they've done a lot of things. You can see on this, again, a screenshot of their website where they have just multiple ways in which they engage the community. And I think what's really important about the Boulder example here is that they have 3 different revenue streams they use. In order to get those revenue streams, they really had to show in the public what affordable housing has meant to and what it means to Boulder. So similarly, they have this education program on videos that show the housing for affordable homes. It talks to nonprofits, it talks to public housing folks. They do have middle and workforce housing there as well. So just a really robust education program and videos that they can recirculate around. I think it's really a good example of really engaging the public in some creative ways. Next slide. And this one I wanted to show you all because it is a very interesting piece. So the ways that they engage their community is in multiple ways, some of which are pretty typical of housing trust funds, like a housing trust fund advisory board made up of community members, experts in the field, as well as residents, and many times low-income folks themselves are on these housing advisory boards. We also have a Housing Boulder action plan, which you're looking at one piece of here. I couldn't give you the whole thing. It was a big document, but this is a screenshot. It's on their website. Again, very transparent, very open about what they're doing to show what kind of plans that they have. And you'll see in this one, there's like how they engage and how much engagement they believe to do with their own staff, community at large, and then the appropriate council or board. And then the plan goes on through like 2018, 19, and 20. And if you go to their website, you'll see it has this big, this long plan with these categories, and it's actually color coded as well, which is pretty neat. As a community member, you can see this darker green color is where they feel like they need more community engagement and collaboration. The lighter green is like lighter communication, and they have different colors for input and just education events. I think it's really kind of shows their efforts towards engaging the community and how the community is engaged at all points in the plans for housing in Boulder. On to the next slide, please. So this slide is about the Bellingham, Washington. And Bellingham, Washington is a community of about 89,000 people. And why I want to show you this one is moving into the report section. So Bellingham was able to pass a levy back in 2012. And how they did that actually was something that is used quite often in all of our towns and cities, which is using their consolidated plan. So that was a report that needs to be done by the city and needs to be submitted. And so the advocates and the city staff work together on the plan to show the needs in housing and what they need to do for Bellingham. And we're able to use that report and message on that to build both a strong community support from the general public. When their kickoff event had 77 organizations signed on, which is quite a few in a town of 89,000. And then plus they got the council support and the administration support and the mayor's support to put the levy on the ballot. And they use that consolidated plan and the needs of housing in the community as a way to build the support for it. And they passed the levy with 56% of the vote back in 2012. But what was another interesting piece on this was that they had to re-up that levy. And so if we go to the next slide, we can see this, they were able to do it now, since they had 6 to 7 years under their belt of working on a housing trust fund, and with the money coming in and being able to show the impact that this has had. So city staff put together this report that you'll see pieces of it here, where they, you see that they were able to exceed their goals. With the money that they received, they're able to exceed their goals and putting in developing and preserving affordable homes. They were able to exceed their goals in helping with rent assistance and home ownership. And they still had things in the pipeline. So I think this is a really important and a really good report. If people are interested, afterwards, I can send the links to these different kind of best practices to Elizabeth and Casey so they can get it out to you all. Because these are really good about showing the need, and what they were able to then do is the advocates were able to then take this report, engage the community at large in a second round of the levy, which then passed by 66%, because voters could see that not only did they, able to do what they said they'd do, they went beyond it. Not only did they go beyond it, but there was still a need in the community to continue to support an affordable housing trust fund in Bellingham. Go to the next slide. So I just wanted to give you guys a quick overview of what is also on our website. If you go to just Housing Trust Fund Project, all one word, you'll find our site. And we have quite a few things there that might be of interest to you. So one is, you'll see this picture is the same as the people picture in the last slide. And this is because it comes from our newsletter. And we have a lot of stories if you're interested in kind of hearing the ins and outs of a campaign across the country that sparks your interest, like this one I just talked about with Bellingham. Also, you can look at them by categories, issues, or the state, and the state, with whatever city you want to see would be within that state. So it's a really good place to see and read the more in-depth story of what happened, and also has a lot of contact information if you find one that was of interest and you want to get more information. Next slide, please. And this slide is kind of very similar, I think, to what you'll see in MHP's reports. So we have a section, and again, this is a screenshot. It might be a little light, sorry about that. That shows a couple things. The lighter white box shows the drop down of the areas under the Housing Trust Fund elements. And so there you can see the kind of basic things about how to put together a housing trust fund. And the smaller box at the bottom is the drop down you would see if you press on campaigns. So the campaigns and how to build and how to operate a campaign and engage the community. Next slide, please. In this last slide, I just wanted to show you guys, I think what might be of interest to you all, another place under our publications and resources. You'll see there, you can see that we periodically put out reports that are of interest to the field. So there's one on rural housing trust funds and how they have helped in case studies there. There's also our 2016, basically the state of housing trust funds across the country. Has some good data there. And this other one on examples and materials that are available, but that might be of interest. So highlighting just, those are all templates of ways in which you could, if you needed to engage a coalition or work, get, oops, sorry. Excuse me, I just had a small technical difficulty. Housing trust fund reports, what they look like and how to, templates for those. This is a place you could find these on our site. So, and again, if you are interested in any of the case studies that I presented here, I'm happy to get you the web addresses for those and get them to you, as well as if you're interested in talking to a person, we can make contacts for you with any of those, with the places I presented here for sure. Any place you maybe find on our website as well. If you, for example, somebody had moved on and we don't have the right contact, you find somebody if you're interested. So, last slide. Yeah, so that's my contact information. We'll be doing questions at the end of the webinar here today, but if you wanted to contact me directly, that's my email. You are welcome to get in touch with me directly, and would love to hear from you all.
Thanks so much, Katie, and look forward to being able to share some of that information that you highlighted. We're going to turn to our next speaker and presentation, and so welcome to Barb Janetta, who's the Executive Director of Alliance Housing. Barb has served as the Executive Director since 2013 and brings a long career of work in community development, wealth building, and nonprofit management. Alliance Housing has, over its history, developed over 500 units. It owns and manages housing that serves very low-income residents and really has a great reputation for being a community-centered and community-oriented organization. And Alliance Housing and Barb have been highly engaged as leaders in the Make Homes Happen coalition and campaign. And I'm turning it over to Barb so we can hear a little bit from her about local housing trust funds and community.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. I'm Barb Janetta, and as she said, I work for Alliance Housing, and we're a member of the Make Homes Happen Minneapolis Coalition. And honestly, it's probably about one of the most satisfying pieces of my work because it's made up of, there's a list of folks there who are really actively engaged. They show up for meetings and activities. They follow up on things they promised. So it really feels like everyone's rowing the boat in the same direction. Many of us were connecting around a lot of different affordable housing crisis issues for years, and as part of our Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers membership, where Make Homes Happen is housed. And the elections in 2013 in Minneapolis, where we're focused on our work, really was an opportunity for us to come together and capitalize on the fact that lots of residents were contacting their council member and the mayoral candidates about the lack of affordable housing, about how hard even a working person has in meeting the rent demands of today, and some issues around tenant protections. So our first activity together was to do a series of forums for city council races and the mayor's race. They were really well attended, both by the candidates themselves and community members. So it gave us a little bit of grounding and credibility to carry on our work forward. And right from the get-go, we said we were advocating for a dedicated long-term fund for affordable housing. The city of Minneapolis actually has an affordable housing trust fund, or a fund it calls that. And when Elizabeth showed her points about what the benefits are, one thing it's lacking is it's not a long-term dedicated source. It has to be decided each year with what's available from property taxes, federal government sources, and others. So we're really looking for a little bit more long-term dedication of funds so that developers can actually plan ahead and meet the need in the community. And if you want to change the slides, we just have the graphics and name of all of the members. So you can see it's quite a wide selection of developers, social service providers, housing advocates, people from faith communities, and neighborhood organizations. And if you want to change the slide, please. Right from the get-go with our dedicated source, or the goals we had for a dedicated source, we had 3 purposes. Production, because we just need more affordable units here in Minneapolis. Preservation, because some of the units we have, especially the ones that are owned by the private market that are maybe a little bit older, but still really decent housing and to some respects more affordable. Were being lost because the market was so hot. Investors were buying those up, turning them over, and charging a lot more rent for units that were already available. And there's a lot of lot of projects that got a lot of publicity because, you know, all of a sudden 260 families got noticed that they had to move because somebody else bought the place and was, you know, going to renovate it. And lastly, and really part of our strength in organizing, is protecting tenants. The market really had gotten out of whack in terms of how much screening landlords were doing, some of the practices and management of buildings, and our members that work directly with tenants and properties really were forceful in getting that on our agenda. And I think it's been a good part of our organizing strategy. So the point here is it's broader than just dollars. We definitely need dollars, but it's also an opportunity to make the tent a little bigger and tackle some of the other issues that make the whole affordable housing crisis a problem. So you can turn the slide if you would. We actually came up with a number, 50 million annually for 10 years. And we were trying to gauge that not to what the city currently budgeted, but looking at a little at the need going forward for affordable units. And our Met Council had projected that we needed to triple affordable housing production just to meet the current estimate in population growth. So we were going to need to run a little bit to keep up with the growth here. And if we didn't, it would just make it harder for the people that were already pinched into the housing market. We knew with those numbers, we also had to look at what was being lost along the way, and then establish a target. So we felt it was fairly bold, but when we looked around the country at what other cities and places had, it seemed doable. So, and along with that goal, we always envisioned that there would be some kind of committee that the city would facilitate that was made up of community members and others that would help track need over time and adjust where the fund was invested according to what the needs were in the community. So if you want to change the slide, that would be great. Right now, there's sort of three major sources that Minneapolis used to feed its existing trust fund program. It uses some taxes, some leftover pooled tax increment financing dollars, and then pass through of home and CDBG dollars that are awarded to Minneapolis for housing kinds of things. It's currently, or the average has been around 10 million a year, so quite a bit off of our 50 million goal, and certainly not a dedicated, well, it's a dedicated source, but it's not long-term. So we, right from the get-go, felt like the city needed to explore, and we would be willing to assist, identifying new revenue tools that could feed and be dedicated towards affordable housing. Because of the way our city is structured, it's actually going to take some state legislation to allow the city to enact more tools. So just this year now, we're engaging first off with the City of Minneapolis intergovernmental relations staff, but also thinking about the county and the state to talk about what tools are out there, what makes the most sense, and what would it take to put those into place so that if a city wanted to use them, they could. We tried to avoid right from the get-go embattling police versus public works versus housing. So we really didn't want to steal from one department to feed another. We always envisioned that we would need some new sources. And we were bolstered a little bit by a study that Governor Dayton did before he left office that engaged lots of people across the state on affordable housing that identified the need to get more tools in the hands of cities so that they could fund the need in their jurisdiction. So you can change the slide for me, please. So we're trying to work at we have a group of people that meets regularly. We were meeting twice a month for a while as a steering committee. We've now moved that down to once a month, and we have two very active committees. One is a policy committee who kind of thinks about our message and what's needed and how we should speak as a group. And the other is our community engagement team that helps craft communication strategies, helps get out participation for various activities, and takes care of materials and those kinds of things. And various people participate in one or more of the steering committee and the committees. So people engage where they feel most valued and most useful. And we're trying to build a little bit of a network beyond the member organizations. And some of our members are member organizations, and they're able to help us reach out to their constituents. The neighborhood organizations have been quite good at reaching out across their residents and neighbors. And the developers have engaged their tenants and others to come together. So you can change the slide. Then I just wanted to mention a couple of things we've used in community engagement in case it's helpful to others. In 2018, we did these pop-up postcard events all over the city in bars and coffee shops, at community festivals and other places. And we had these little postcards where people could write on them some of their issues or dreams or ideas to get more affordable housing in Minneapolis. And then we collected those and delivered them to the mayor's office. You can see them. There's a backdrop of Mayor Frey after he won in his, I think it was in his budget speech, and a group of our members delivering those to City Hall. That was a great way to engage just people wandering in and out of these venues we used for the pop-up. It's not hard to get people talking about money or money for housing or issues with housing. It does seem to be an issue that connects us all. And then this past year, we had sort of heard after a fairly decent 2019 budget proposal and adoption by the city of Minneapolis, we had been kind of warned like, ooh, we don't know if 2020 is gonna, live up to your expectations, probably gonna be less money. So we organized a phone call campaign to the mayor's office before he came out with his budget, engaging our board members, our neighbors, our tenants, our members, to make a call and just to encourage the mayor to continue work on a dedicated source for affordable housing, simply because it's not a one-year money and you're done kind of an issue. And you can change the slide. There are various opportunities in the city budget process to actually speak at public hearings. There's usually one during the day, one at night. So we fanned out and scheduled meetings with 2 or 3 people with each of the council members. And then we had a really decent showing. You can see our little stickers on ourselves that we wore to all the budget hearings and events to kind of unite the Make Homes Happen group. And you can change the slide. This summer there was, no election or kind of ready event to continue our engagement, but we're right in the period of building towards the council's adoption of the budget. So we took advantage of a neighborhood event in Powderhorn, and we engaged a local artist who actually talked to people in that cute little car there that she made out of a golf cart or something. She would talk to them about their idea of home, what home meant for them, and then she wrote personal poems for everybody that engaged with us. We had people put them in an envelope with an address on it so we could mail them to them, but we asked them for permission if we could make a collage or sort of a super poem out of it. And we just got that back from the artist, and we'll use that in our engagement of council members and others as we proceed through these budget hearings. I think everybody is feeling pretty happy about that event with the artist, just because it's just another dimension to the work and engages some folks who maybe wouldn't be willing to just talk to a bunch of housing staffers or something. So I think we'll probably figure out ways to engage more artists in our work going forward. And then the next slide, which is our last. So here's what we feel like we can go, all right, here's our accomplishments to date, and then where we're headed. So in the 2019 city budget, there was a collection of about $40 million for affordable housing. So nearly, almost a 4-fold increase in what had been dedicated before. And it really was for a cross section of production preservation and tenant protections. This year we've gotten a little less, looks like around 30 million across a number of purposes. We're encouraged because there was more talk in this budget cycle about creating a dedicated long-term source. The mayor actually, in his budget address, laid out a projection of where those funds would be over the next 10 years. It's not enough, it's not dedicated, but it's at least putting the vocabulary in place to look a little bit more long-term and not be dealing with annual budget cycles year after year to determine the budget amount. So I think that's all I have to offer right now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Barb. Great info there. And I have the pleasure of introducing thank you, Elizabeth. Our last but definitely not least speaker, Jennifer Bergman, who wears many hats, some of those as the Executive Director of the Brainerd HRA and the Crow Wing County HRA, which are located in central Minnesota. The Brainerd HRA administers 320 housing choice vouchers and owns/operates 325 units of rental housing, including public housing, light TIC, Section 8 new construction, and Section 236. In addition, both HRAs are actively involved in revitalization efforts, including a rehab program for owner-occupied housing, rental-occupied housing, and commercial properties. Both HRAs have been the catalyst for several redevelopment programs using a variety of funding sources that include tax increment financing, issuance of revenue bonds, and local levy dollars. So, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much for the introduction. And you can go to the next slide or to the first slide, that would be great. So as mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Brainerd HRA, but back in 2013, the Crow Wing County HRA asked the Brainerd HRA if we would be willing to staff their HRA. And so we entered into a management agreement with the Crow Wing County HRA, and the very first thing we did was we did a strategic plan. We created, along with the board, a mission statement and goals. And so I really like to just start out with what the board adopted as their mission, and that's to support the creation of affordable housing, economic development, and redevelopment projects towards a more vibrant Crow Wing County. Next slide, please. Then what they do every 2 years is they create goals and objectives. These are our 2019-2020 goals. I'm not going to read through them, but I'm just going to focus on goal number 4, which is to address the workforce housing needs in Crow Wing County. So if you could go to the next slide. So when the board started exploring this goal, we started talking about what our next steps should be. We continue in Crow Wing County to hear anecdotally that there's a shortage of workforce housing. But we don't know what that means. Is that from somebody making $10 to $12 an hour, $12 to $15 an hour, part-time, full-time? So we decided that we really needed to conduct a workforce housing study and hire a consultant that could come in and help us do that. Really, the purpose of the study was to help decision makers, stakeholders, community members, develop a sense of the availability and then the needs of workforce housing, and then really to understand what those ideas were. The purpose of the report really was to formulate some kind of strategies and recommendations on what the Crow Wing County HRA could do to help with that effort. Next slide, please. So we did a request for proposal. We did get several responses, and we hired a group out of Wisconsin. Their company is Redevelopment Resources, and they teamed up with Windward Group. The reason that we selected Redevelopment Resources is because they brought in not only a housing aspect, but really an economic development and a workforce aspect as well. And we thought that that was a really great marriage when we're looking at workforce housing. We thought it was really important to understand the employment side of this issue as well. So the very first thing we did is that we put together a task force, and I'm not gonna go through the names, but they're in front of you on your screen. And what I really hope you see in this was that we tried to get a representative from different aspects, different parts of the county. For those of you who don't know where Crow Wing County is, Brainerd is the county seat, but we also have Cross Lake, which is home to the Whitefish chain of lakes. We border on Gull Lake. Part of Gull Lake is in Crow Wing County, so we have some of the very large resorts. It's very touristy, and our population in Crow Wing County is about 60,000, but in the summer, our population shoots up to upwards of 200,000. So we really needed to kind of take a look at the county as a whole. Next slide, please. So where are we right now? So we kicked off this workforce housing study in June, and right now we're conducting surveys, both of just our residents, our full-time residents. We are also surveying our second homeowners or our cabin owners. And then we're also surveying our businesses, our large businesses throughout Crow Wing County. We anticipate that we'll have a draft of this workforce housing study in mid-November for the final report to be done by the end of the year. Next slide, please. So I really kind of wanted to set the stage. That was going to be our community engagement. That workforce housing study was going to position us to do something to make a change in Crow Wing County in 2020 for 2021. Well, in July, a couple of our staff had a meeting with Commissioner Brecken and our county administrator on an unrelated topic. And about 2 minutes into it, the commissioner asked staff, what could we do to address the workforce housing needs? And we explained, well, you know, we're in the middle of this workforce housing study. And if you saw on the last slide, Commissioner Brecken is on that task force. And they said, yeah, we know, but we also know that there are going to be recommendations that come out of that workforce housing study. Why do we want to wait for 2020 to adopt something in a 2021 budget when we could be ready to get programs started the first of the year in 2020 if we adopted something this year? So with funds budgeted, we could just hit the ground running. So next slide. So we stepped back and walked away from that meeting and said, okay, first of all, I think we were shocked. How many times do you get a county commissioner asking the HRA to consider increasing their levy to address workforce housing needs or affordable housing needs in general? So I've heard Randall Hammerlin, and I think Randall's on this, I've heard him talk for years about housing trust funds. So I thought, well, okay, let me take a look at that. I called Randall. I started doing some research. Ironically, MHP had just released their study on housing trust funds. So all of a sudden I had this wealth of information right at my fingertips. So we went to the Crow Wing County HRA board with some information, both the information from Red Wing HRA, Bloomington HRA, from Alexandria HRA that had just adopted an ordinance for their local housing trust fund, as well as the information from Minnesota Housing Partnerships. So we kind of had all of this right at our fingertips. And we as staff recommended that we increase our levy to create a housing trust fund of $250,000. Well, the Crow Wing County HRA board said, no, that's not allowed. That's not enough. Let's do a $500,000 housing trust fund. So staff presented to the committee of the whole, or the county board's budget committee, a request to increase the Crow Wing County HRA's levy from $98,500 up to $729,500, which would result in the creation of a $500,000 housing trust fund. This initial conversation happened in July. Our request to the Crow Wing County HRA board went in August. In September, the beginning of September, we were before the budget committee asking for this. And on September 24th, the county board authorized a $729,500 levy for the Crow Wing County HRA board, or on a 4-1 vote. So all of this happened in a very short period of time. And before I go to the next slide, I think what I know a big part of this conversation is about community engagement. And from my perspective, what really made the decision and the difference in this was having a champion on the county board. Commissioner Brecken is really passionate about workforce housing and the shortage that we have in Crow Wing County of affordable housing. And he really carried this torch. And he went talking to other communities and his constituents and really got the county board rallied around this issue. So with that, next slide. So the Crow Wing County HRA asked what we could do. We did some research. We found the housing trust funds. We believe that this is a solution. We don't even have recommendations yet, so we're in the process right now of drafting an ordinance. But while we know this is a big initiative, we're also confident that we can make a difference in this and greatly appreciate the support of the county board in this initiative. So anyway, that concludes my report and my presentation, and I would be happy to answer questions at that time. And sorry about my cold. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you to all of our guest speakers today. What wonderful presentations. And I'm guessing, I know I just learned a lot sitting here listening to you guys, so I'm sure that our audience has too. And we're going to go ahead and roll into Q&A. Elizabeth, do you have a question up on deck for anybody?
Well, first I just want to make sure that if folks have questions or comments that they would like to make as well about things happening in your community or how you'd like to get some reaction from the panelists, go ahead and you can submit that using the Q&A function. But I might start with just one question, and I was just thinking about this a little bit when Barb was speaking, and I think what feels, at least to me, a little bit unusual about Make Homes Happen is, in that campaign work in Minneapolis, is it is a very highly organized and then very highly successful campaign in bringing together kind of a community request. I was curious if, Barb, maybe you could start this out. You had any suggestions for what might be most helpful to community organizations that are thinking about, you know, wow, what could we do together that seems to not be working alone? Like, what are some suggestions you have on tips for getting started? And then I might ask if others have some input on that.
You know, what comes to mind first for me, it was really great to have sort of place to call home for Make Homes Happen. And our consortium of community developers that we have here that has a lot of housing and economic development members staffed our effort, you know, with the help of lots of volunteers. But I think that gave us a little bit more of a solid foundation, not to just do a one-off, say, a bunch of forums and then be done, but to give us sort of an organizing structure to carry it forward. So I think that seems pretty significant to me.
Thanks. Any additional thoughts on that? Maybe Jennifer?
No, I don't have any other real thoughts on that. I think that, well, I guess what I think is just community engagement is really critical to getting something like this done. And again, I go back to our county commissioner who really carried the.
So I actually have a couple questions now lining up here, and in some ways they seem a little bit related, but maybe I'll just kind of tape them one by one and see what we have time for. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left in the webinar. So the first question is from a gentleman who says, how can I work to establish a local housing trust fund in my community if the HRA in my community is historically, and he uses the word non-progressive, but I think it could just be, you know, doesn't seem to have the political will or doesn't seem to be supportive of that concept. What might be some suggestions for being able to persuade your HRA to move forward?
Jennifer, could we maybe start with you, and then Katie, I'm sure you might have some feedback on this one as well.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the things that I think took us by surprise as well is that Crow Wing County is an incredibly conservative county. And I think that one of the reasons that the HRA was able to do this was because of us continuously hearing about the shortage of workforce housing. We're hearing it from employers, both small and large employers. And I think it coming kind of that grassroots effort was what made the difference in making that happen here. The other thing that happened is we had an election that brought 2 new people onto the county board. Don't know that I'm giving you really the advice that you need, but one of the things that I was really interested to hear was kind of Katie and how you did your kind of grassroots effort, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the very interesting things about housing trust funds is they're not a partisan issue. I mean, I think, Jennifer, just what you said about conservative areas pass housing trust funds because they see the need. I think that the way the community engagement works there is if you are doing couple things. One is letting the people know the stories of people and the actual faces of people who are affected by the housing shortage, whatever area you're working in. And then the other piece, I think, is some of the kind of unlikely allies that I think, Jennifer, you just kind of mentioned, right? So if it's housing advocates who are usually coming to the county about issues, if there is a way to think of joining forces with others across your area, the business community, healthcare or education. There was one thing about education. If there's a way to connect with those organizations and those people working on those issues to see the intersections of housing and their issue as well, you could have a stronger united front, because there are just so many housing trust funds that have been passed in cities across the country that have been passed by conservative government, conservative city councils or counties. So I don't think of it as a progressive, non-progressive issue. I think it's more of a thing that needs to happen, and people are willing to really dig in on it. Money can become a challenge, of course, when you're looking on things, but again, being creative and getting creative sources of funding is another way to kind of begin to think about how you're going to bring together a coalition that could work on a trust fund.
I was going to add one thing, Elizabeth. This is Barb. I was going to okay, sorry. I was going to suggest there's some really good studies out there that show the cost to counties for people being unstably housed, to crisis services, public safety, and other things. I know Wilder has a good one. The Family Housing Fund had one, probably a little dated now. But even maybe with more conservative commission members, they may be moved that you can save money long-term if people are stably housed.
So we are actually coming right up to the end of the webinar. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I will say I feel like the answers we just had to the question about working with your HRA on how to support kind of relate to the next question, which I don't think we have time for, but is about how to address concerns with increasing tax levy when you're advocating for housing funding. And so I think some of the responses we just heard address that in part, and there can be other ways that I think are about what's the message, but also increasing money for housing doesn't always mean that you are increasing the overall budget. So I'll just kind of make that point as well.
And if I could just address that real quickly, because I think it's
please.
This is Jennifer. I think that's a great question. And I just want to talk just a second about Crow Wing County. ISD 181, which is the Brainerd School District, just approved a $203 million referendum levy for improving our schools. And I think one of the things that we found here was that there was this huge investment in our schools. Now we want to make sure that we have the people and the families coming here. And I actually think that referendum helped in showing that there's a need for housing as well. So I wouldn't shy away from those referendums.
Thank you. I think that was really valuable input, and I'm sure several people on the call are interested in that. We will be posting this webinar on our website so that it is available for review, and we'll be sending out that message. I want to say thank you again to our presenters, and thank all of you who took the time to participate. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.